On June 2, 2012, DGP, the Center for Design and Geopolitics, held its second annual conference. Entitled Designing Geopolitics 2, it was held in the Black Box Theater of Cal IT 2, the California Institute for Telecommunications and Information Technology in La Jolla, on the campus of the University of California at San Diego. Thank you, Jeffrey. After some back and forth, that ended up working really, really well with the PowerPoint here, so very much appreciate that. And I hope you can stick around a bit for the discussion with Metahaven and Molly as well. Daniel, are we good to go on your stuff? Okay, good. So I just want to let me introduce our guest. Daniel van der Velden comes to La Jolla from Amsterdam for this conference. Metahaven is a project that in many ways I think is perhaps the most closely aligned to the Center for Design and Geopolitics in terms of its interest, its perspective, and the work that they're doing. But one of the things that Metahaven is particularly focused on is especially recently, is the role of representation, communication, media, if you like, in the formation, legitimation, and stabilization of the state and the claims of sovereignty and authority within this as well, which is in itself a very old practice, going back perhaps to, I was thinking while I was putting, say, Albrecht Dürer's Grand Arch of Maximilian, a kind of org chart diagram of the structures of this kind of these sorts of systems. But one of the things in particular that their work has been focused on is not just the ways in which, as Tim O'Reilly used to talk about, a government as a platform, by which means the federal government would have lots of APIs that you could plug into and do things with, but rather also the inversion of this, how very large-scale software platforms come to take on the role of states, whether they are invited to do so or not. So it's not then, we could say, that Facebook, Apple, and Google all have a role to have a position to play in the machinations of states or the geopolitical futures, but rather that they enact, that they represent three different kinds of geopolitical futures in and of themselves. That the architecture of their brands, their software platforms, are not only representative of geopolitical interests, they are geopolitics. Facebook, it seems to me, rather explicitly and emphatically does not want to foster or open anything of the kind of information infrastructures that we've been discussing, and in many ways is specifically, actively, and unambiguously hostile to the very idea of such a thing. Facebook, perhaps like China itself, is underestimated, I think, as a bit of an infrastructural player. And it seems to me that they understand the cloud in ways that Apple, for example, cannot. They'll have their pickings of whatever is left of Microsoft at the end of the day. But their goal ultimately, as I see it, is a private internet. Not Facebook online, but Facebook as the line. And in this sense, China's total policy is perhaps broadly analogous. Apple, on the other hand, has taken the mantle from Disney in its expertise in the overly closed system experience design, and operates, by comparison to Facebook or China, with much more carrot than stick. Apple bases its market sector dominance in enforcing a total design seamlessness into which individuals, consumers, can effectively invest their most utopian desires. All utopias are closed systems, are islands, and in the future of nation-state-sized gated communities, that utopian desire may lead Apple well out of consumer electronics as we conventionally understand it, and further afield into the wider envelopes of everyday life. Google, on the third hand, believes itself to be a much more cosmopolitan and reason-driven mission. A few months ago, actually, they bid against Apple and Microsoft for a series of patents from Nortel, with sums representing sometimes obscure mathematical strings. For example, they bid $3.14159 billion, or pi multiplied by a billion, for one particular bundle. They had bid numbers that were Brune's constant, with a Miesel-Mertens constant, which relate to prime numbers. This I take as a kind of emphatic symbolic statement by Google that ultimately the immutable, ecumenical, and universal laws of mathematics, which are by their nature uninterested in the human folly of political hierarchies, will ultimately win out over mere hysterical numbers of the financial market. So now, while Google recently dumped PowerMeter, they still have a license to sell energy in the U.S., which is actually a quite peculiar and difficult thing to obtain. And I think in the longer term, Google Energy will be a key player in the retail and wholesaling of renewables, both the management of consumer and municipal facing smart grids. So they see, Google that is, the pairing of bits and electrons as part of their vocation, I think, in ways that others cannot. Google Space, Google AI, Google Caliphate, we'll have to see. Now, no one, I think, has done more to visualize the correspondence between the bounded territorial sovereignty of the state as a kind of walled garden, on the one hand, and the emergence of global-scale software and hardware walled gardens as models for what states may evolve into, than Daniel van der Velden, Vinke Kruk, and Metahaven. Metahaven is a studio for design and research based in Amsterdam, founded in 2006. The early work was combined in a book called Uncorporate Identity, which I've been pushing on my graduate students for some time now. Their Face State project was recently featured at the Walker the Art Museum in Minnesota. So without further delay, it's my real pleasure to welcome Daniel and Metahaven to share their work with us today. Thank you.
When Benjamin invited us for this, he said, we have this great video wall, send as many gigabytes as you can. And he also said, okay, go meta on your practice, please, But since we are already called Metahaven, there's an inherent problem in that, I guess. So what I'll do is I'll go through, quickly through this book, using the video wall to its, most capabilities. With how many gigabyte now on screen, I don't know. But then go quickly through the book, then show you some recent projects, then go into a little bit more hypothetical part that has to do with the cloud, and then end off with the state of graphic design today, because I'm a graphic designer, as is my colleague Vinke Kruk. So we are, with the work that we do, often in sort of uncharted territory for graphic designers, although of course graphic design is continually through, it's the things that it does, like creating identities, creating, user interfaces. It's constantly entwined with the phenomena that we've been talking about, but it's sort of very difficult to grasp these geopolitical phenomena through graphic design. So Uncorporate Identity, in a way, is a book against design. It comes from a love-hate relationship, for sure, with design, and it's 608 pages, so there's too much in it to really talk about now in detail. But the one thing that I want to talk about that characterizes this book and that really maps it out is the transformation in branding, and we are basically in this book noting a transformation from the concept of soft power, which is basically it's basically the kind of power that the US deployed in the 90s to be attractive, for example, to network power. Network power is a completely different type of power. You could say that there's a transformation that's visible in branding, it's visible in the things that we've been talking about in the morning, from just being nice to setting the network standards. And I'm going to quote a little bit from the book, from David Grewal, who we interviewed for the book, and we had him talk. He's the guy who coined the term network power, and we confronted him with this whole soft power legacy that we're dealing with, both in branding, in public diplomacy, graphic design. So he reacted to this as follows. So I'm quoting, quote, David Grewal. Although the idea of network power may bring to mind the notion of soft power, it should be considered distinct from it. Soft power can be considered a form of persuasion or persuasiveness. Soft power can sometimes work through network power. For example, the rise of English as a global language has no doubt increased the ability of the United States to use diplomatic pressure and economic means to achieve its foreign policy objectives. But unlike soft power, network power need not to be tied to any particular agent, so it does not depend on international goodwill or even the continued existence of any particular state. Rather, network power may operate through wholly deterritorialized networks, and even temporarily dislocated ones. Therefore, one thing that is different in network power is that people may not even need to be persuaded to do something that isn't in their interest. For example, learning English in order to take part in the global economy and culture is something that non-English speakers may feel compelled to do for the sake of coordination. And even though they may resent it, they will do it anyway. By contrast, soft power seems to work according to a different dynamic, which is that of various forms of mimicry, mirroring, persuasiveness, leadership, role model qualities, all of which involve changing the subjectivity of the people over whom the soft power is being exercised. Of course, this is there's much more to this. So this is an overview, just a sort of cross-section of the book. But to my knowledge, Uncorporate Identity is the only book that I'm aware of that makes this point about soft power and network power sort of succinctly. But it's also a book that experiments with the visual format of the book. So it's not your sort of typical textbook. It's not your typical sort of academic reader, but it's also not your typical design book. I guess that really typifies our position sort of in between these fields a little bit. Can we go on into some particular spread here? Well, go into this one, please. The one with the credit cards. Yeah. Yeah, make it really big. Thank you. So this is a really early piece where we worked with we worked with the identities of all kinds of money laundering entities as they are around. These are from Montenegro mainly, and the names of these banks are real. So they are called, the Loyal Bank, Dominant Bank, Gold Rain Bank, etc. So they try to make up, in their naming, they try to make up for their lack of physical presence, as it were. And we created this whole series of gray cards for these banks that were part of a project we did at a time that had to do with data havens. So, okay. Next cloud. So from this interest in data havens and in the role of the state and the role of sovereignty and the role that sovereign territories can still play maintaining certain freedom on the network, we got interested in WikiLeaks. And this is a whole bunch of research files to do with WikiLeaks that we created over the past year or so that we organized as this kind of stack of cards. So basically these are sort of cards that you could almost interchange, and you could put one on the other place or something. So we basically voluntarily offered to WikiLeaks to think about their identity, presuming that there would be infinite space for innovation in this respect. And we started out, and I personally believe that it also led us to really finally to question this whole focus on identity that we have in our practice. So we started out by basically opening up the way that the logo or the identity is created with these two globes and the sort of dripping structure that's in the middle, the sort of one globe leaking into the other, by creating a sort of more graphic versions of that. And then we started to, maybe can enlarge this one. Thank you. This one. We started to focus on the notion that the globe is just this sort of widely featured thing in all kinds of identities. So it's basically UN, Google Maps, and Wikipedia. Thank you. So from that point on, it can go back now. Yeah. So we started to become interested in the idea of the hosting model, because what WikiLeaks has been doing, certainly in the beginning, seems to be some sort of a grand game of data. It's like they've hosted their data in different jurisdictions so that it could never be taken offline. That was the premise of the model, and that model has worked to a certain extent, and to a certain point in time, it more or less worked. So we start to think about what if that would be reflected in the identity, and of course we were also interested in an inherent notion of stealth, which would be very important to an organization like WikiLeaks. So anyway, we just did tons and tons of stuff on that. Maybe enlarge this one. Yeah, you could do this one, yeah. So we started to become interested in the notion of transparent camouflage as a sort of contradiction of terms that really talks about this condition of WikiLeaks. Okay, can go now. Thanks. So we've also created various forms of posters and even pins. These pins were basically, they were for free, and you could just take them. And it has all the familiar WikiLeaks slogans on it, like the People's Intelligence Agency and We Open Government. And the design is extremely conservative. At some point, the Herald Tribune picked up our work and had this article published, Business, Reuters, this one, crafting an image for the WikiLeaks brand, which had all our quirky graphics in it, the Petri dishes that look completely different from real Petri dishes, but that were supposed to imply some sort of geopolitical scientific experiment going on behalf of WikiLeaks. And after that, we were able to think about this project in more concrete terms, and the more concrete terms basically implied that the thing that WikiLeaks is most interested in terms of design is merchandising. So it can go. Thank you. So, for example, click on the mug. One of the things that this organization does to stay afloat is selling merchandise. And that's largely because of a banking blockade that's been going on for almost 2 years now. So they basically compensate for this by acting like a rock band. They want to sell T-shirts, they want to sell mugs, etc. And by doing that, I'm not judgmental of that in terms of, if I would have to survive under these circumstances, maybe I would do the same thing. But it kind of unavoidably gets you into a sort of logic of branding. And that's exactly, I think, what we encountered. So close it down. So we came up with all kinds of other things, like first sketches for T-shirts. Then we came up with the WikiLeaks typefaces, which are featured here. Could we open up this one? Yeah. So there would be, when it would be about documents, there would be a little drop next to the word documents that would be automatically implemented by the typeface. So it would be a typeface that sort of, in a very stealthy way, talks about that there has been a leak. Then we were, put up the next slide. We were invited by the Gwangju Design Biennale in Korea, which is last year's edition, 2011, was really amazing. It was like floors and floors and floors of more or less the type of design work that you would expect to be discussed here at this conference. There was almost no product. Everything was research. There was research about the Arab Spring. Well, there was so much. But anyway, one of the pieces was also, they commissioned us to create an installation for this biennial, and we basically created lots of prototypes for this merchandising, finally, including also scarves. And we'll look at that a little bit later. Shrink it. So maybe go on to the cloud sovereignty thing. So that's, yeah, the one next. Yeah. So we'll get to that notion of cloud sovereignty in a bit. But basically, this poster had to do with this panel. It's basically, we call this ultra low resolution campaign images. Had to do with Iceland, which is a country that WikiLeaks had a little stint with in the past, and that has now started a sort of radical open data policy, or at least is trying to implement that. Close it. Maps. So the next one can be enlarged a bit. Models of how WikiLeaks operates in terms of its the hosting structure, almost impossible to keep track of and very hard to verify when you only have public sources to refer to. But basically, a model that is all centered around the so-called inner sanctum, which would be the moment or the place where a leak gets uploaded. Of course, we have learned that this facility is not working anymore already for quite some time. But it used to be the heart, of course, the heart of WikiLeaks. There would be no leaking site without it. Okay, next. You don't need to enlarge that one. Maybe the very last one. And eventually the products that we'll go into in a bit were auctioned by WikiLeaks via eBay. which is one of the ways that they can still get, to some sort of funding. So, okay, next cloud. The next cloud will only be one gigantic map that hopefully will zoom in infinitely, which is the axis of reputation. And the axis of reputation is an attempt to map out. You can go really enlarge this one. Yeah, good. Is an attempt to map out two axes: ally and adversary, and support and exploitation with regard to WikiLeaks. So zoom out a little bit. If you like Levmanovich now, you like shrink it. Yeah, go to the far down corner.
Yeah, right.
That more. These are people who don't like WikiLeaks and are, in a way, exploiting it. These are the people who approved of murdering Julian Assange. And now go to the top right corner. The very top right, there's of course WikiLeaks itself. And here's a whole group of people and agents who are basically in support of WikiLeaks. And now go to the middle of the map. Right at the center is Twitter, as neither supportive nor exploitative, and neither an ally nor an adversary. And of course, there's a massive Hollywood industry underway around WikiLeaks. With if you go a little bit that way, like so towards me, and then a bit up. There's like HBO. They're like around the HBO logos and the DreamWorks. All that is, there's massive films and feature films in preparation around the story of Julian Assange, allegedly, and some of it confirmed. Okay, so next cluster. So this is the visual campaign that was developed around the T-shirts and the scarves. We came up with the idea of the scarves because they have a sense of opacity and transparency. So they spoke naturally to this idea of transparent camouflage that we developed earlier. And there's also a play with the kind of Louis Vuitton aspect in it. So if you enlarge the Louis Vuitton. No, the other one. Sorry, that one. One further. Yeah. That has a WikiLeaks Louis Vuitton identity in it. And of course, camouflage going on. And then maybe we can go to some of the shirts. Open up. Yeah, open just one of them. Yeah, just 3 of them is fine. Yeah. So basically, like a band has tour dates, WikiLeaks has leaks. And these are simply commemorated on the shirts. So with that, you don't you don't relate to a logo or anything. You relate to a particular leak. The campaign was made in collaboration with 2 fashion photographers, Meinke Klein, who are really good friends of us, and everyone worked on this campaign basically for no money. So we were able to have her, the whole series plays with hiding in plain sight, and the model here is this season's model for Prada. So there is an enormous overlap with a kind of almost glib, idea of what WikiLeaks could be. Okay, thanks. And then next cluster. So from this particular stint with WikiLeaks, we can really we've been starting to think more about the cloud and about the notion of what the notion of sovereignty and the notion of cloud sovereignty could mean. And there we get on a very slippery terrain because the notion of the network, or the problem of the network, is that it's not finite. It's infinite. And of course, to talk about power, to talk about sovereignty, you need to talk about finite units. You talk about something that has a border, a boundary. So this is a stack of cards that is currently sort of informing our thoughts on cloud sovereignty. And maybe it's just useful to pick out some of the some of the quotes from it. So, for example, pick out this one. This is very much in line with what Larry Smarr said this morning. A cloud computing center looks like an IKEA or a Walmart, a closed, large, flat box. Unlike an IKEA, you can't visit it and there's nothing to be bought. The precise location of data centers is often a secret. Companies don't usually advertise them, not the public image or brand of their operations, but their actual operations depend on them. Of course, then we go a little bit another direction with that. Take this one. In a kind of debate about forming content, you could say that if these enormous energy-slurping data farms are the cloud's true form, then they remind us of the medieval castle, the treasure chest, and the military base. They remind us of the fact that the internet is grounded in territories and in the political and military conflicts that have dominated them since recorded history. So then the whole story of cloud sovereignty is really problematized by a few, disturbing facts. Let's pick out one. Basically the fact that the cloud, because the cloud is mostly hosted in U.S. jurisdiction, it is also accessible to U.S. to U.S. law enforcement under various legal frameworks. For example, Birgitta Jonsdottir, who is an Icelandic member of parliament, had her Twitter account subpoenaed in 2011 in an ongoing U.S. Department of Justice research or investigation into WikiLeaks. And then she said this. Yeah? She tweeted, ironically, a foreign government would have a hard time getting permissions for officials entering my offline home. Same should apply to my online home. So there we go into these discussions of, should data be portable? What is your ownership over the data? Could we even call this a home? And that she tried to appeal together with some other people to this decision, and this was rejected. And go to the next one and open it up. Jonsdottir's demands were refused. The U.S. attorney wrote in a court filing that her request demonstrated an overriding purpose to obtain a roadmap of the government's investigation. The subscribers have no right to notice regarding any such developments as confidential criminal investigation, any more than they have a right to notice of tax record requests, wiretap orders, or other confidential investigative steps. Of course, that's weird if you see that she's Icelandic. So a tax record could not be subpoenaed in the same way as Twitter account information by the U.S. Justice Department, if I'm correct. So maybe go to that one on the far end. This suggestion is being put forward by Bernard Keane, who is a Australian journalist, and he says the only real solution is social media networks outside the jurisdiction of nation states, which is the old dream of the data haven. WikiLeaks is currently establishing its own social network, and Anonymous established Anon Plus. There have also been anonymous microblogging sites, etc. So this whole story about cloud sovereignty tries to grapple with these issues. And this will be part of our next book called Black Transparency. And I have to say that some of the morning sessions especially were extremely helpful for me in sort of bringing my thoughts a little further, on this topic. Okay. Next cluster. The project that Benjamin just mentioned, called Face State, is a project that deals with, in a speculative manner, with the future of statehood and social networking, assuming that running a state is expensive and that the legitimacy of government is overall decreasing. We project that there will be a substantial overlap between the sort of self-governance of the social network combined with the framework of the state. And that of course doesn't need to take the form of a corporation or state per se, but it would rather be some sort of extreme overlap. So in a way, this is a projection of what would happen if Facebook and the state would in a way merge. So this is currently on view at the Cooper Hewitt Design Museum in New York as part of a large exhibition there. So this work was commissioned by the Walker Art Center and the Cooper Hewitt. So it's ironically it's co-commissioned by the Smithsonian Institution, which is the parent institution of the Cooper Hewitt. So the state is ironically sort of involved here. So the first one says surveillance is social, which is a provocative statement to say that, what have we done since, the Bronze Age in our villages and settlements? We have looked over each other. So basically, if you expand that, you could call it surveillance. So the face state could claim that, we have basically always watched over each other. So it's social. The second one draws on face recognition in a way that is sort of maybe more painterly and abstract, because that also plays a role in our work. It's not all factual, it's also sometimes a bit strange and dreamy. The one in the middle all these are also objects that are in the show, refers to something that we call the pool of memory, and it has to do with an innate sense of melancholia that is also somehow key to all these enormous, repositories of faces and memories and things that we've, been through, etc. Then the next one, constitution as terms of service. The increasing overlap between the notion of a constitution and the notion of terms of service, or rather, shouldn't we treat the terms of service of our social networks as a constitution? And here we note that also with regard to the notion of currency, that the current Facebook logo is just one horizontal dash away from becoming a currency symbol. And elsewhere, we've argued around the euro and the now since years, imminent collapse of the euro, that the biggest currency unit that underlies the euro, would it collapse, would be Facebook credits and not the national currencies. So that's where we came up with that, double F, Facebook sign, and that we sort of deployed that later on. And then on far right, the mobile social wallet, which has a much larger idea of what finance is. So you could have social debt and social credit, for example, as forms of administered debt and credit, and there would be some interest for the state to be involved in the development of these forms of value creation and maintenance. So that's for face state. Next, cloud or cluster. How are we doing with time? Okay, over time, of course. I'm always on time, I know, but so these three, you leave them as they were. It's fine. Yeah, good. They have to do with the criminalization of dissent. So this goes on a different trajectory. So maybe zoom in on the far right corner of that thing on the left. Here you can read a notice. Go a bit down. So pull it a bit down. Yeah, this is the terrorism/extremism update for the City of London business community, December 2, 2011. And what we see here in this notice is that Occupy is listed as a terrorist threat. So this is basically probably carelessness on behalf of the person who compiled this note. So I wouldn't immediately assume like an enormously Orwellian intent behind it, but definitely there is this notion that legitimate dissent, legitimate and lawful political speech is becoming criminalized in ways that almost slip through our conscience. We almost don't notice it. It's almost like, okay, it's terrorism. Okay, Al Qaeda next to Occupy. What's going on? Oh yeah, okay, and then you've forgotten it, and the next day it's a reality in a way. So that shrink it again, please. Thank you. So the generation of basically the graduates without a future, which are now running sort of progressive movements in Europe and the US, they live on this, or they exist from this combination of being jobless, being fearless, and being wireless. And the wirelessness is what makes the thing tie in completely with the cloud, of course. And then on the far right, we have one of a series of works that we call grand schemes, where we radically simplify the world. And this one says there's the world, then there's the U.S. Patriot Act, and inside that there's lolcats. So it's basically YouTube. Lolcats are on YouTube or on Flickr. They're overseen by all kinds of legislation under among which the Patriot Act, and that exists in the world. Then we'll go to the very last one. It's really the statement that I want to end with, which kind of summarizes our current condition. We're in a permanent condition of SOS, it seems. And that's sort of the intermissions in that regime are moments of deep LOL. So part of our job is not to lose sight of the permanent sense of hilariousness that we are living through. Thank you.